Welcome to an episode of Techniques, where we explore quick design techniques that can help you on your path. In this sequence you're about to see, I explore subdivision as a technique for dividing a whole into multiple new parts and regions to which we can begin to explore and find new shapes and potential forms with our eye and the movement of the pen or the pencil. You can start by drawing any region on a piece of paper. It can be a rectangle, circle, triangle, trapezoid, anything that starts to form a closed boundary that you can recognize and work with its boundary elements like its edges. Here I've drawn kind of an irregular rectangular shape. A little bit of parallel on two sides, the other two sides diminishing towards one direction. Now that I have a closed boundary, I pick a point on one edge and then divide it. Draw across, subdivide it into two new regions. You can go straight across, keep it perpendicular, or just pick any direction and see where it goes. We're going to just keep following this along, picking new edges and dividing the shape that they bound. Here I'm just not quite doing it in half on each one so they don't quite line up. Sometimes following the organization of the paper, sometimes following the lines that are already there, beginning to find maybe a set of rules or repetitions that I can use to continue to divide this page. And this subdivision method works pretty quickly. It's a very generative technique. We're always breaking down the whole into smaller and smaller regions. I like to try to take it until maybe my medium doesn't work so well anymore. I'm not able to divide with this thick marker at a certain point because it becomes too kind of mushy. And you see here I begin to explore, what do I do next? Well, I've always got this kind of split division, and I'm just sticking with that basic rule set there to keep going further and further down, but allowing myself the freedom to play in each case. Do I go straight up? Do I go perpendicular to the original line? I see that starting to emerge as a bit of a pattern, and so I follow it here and there, but from time to time it feels right to kind of go against that grain to add a little dynamic motion to the drawing or twist the page. Now as you're drawing, especially freehand like this, you might find that you occasionally make some wobbles or mistakes. I don't like to use an eraser most of the time, especially in design thinking or design exercise, and so as you see there, I just thickened up the line, kind of covered the mistake, used it as an opportunity to draw through it and see where it might go. In this case, it's starting to produce an area of emphasis within the drawing, something that stands out, that has line weight to it or value to those edges. And I'm carrying that through to some of the next moves or tracking it back over previous ones, trying to find thickness or continuity through this, what was originally maybe a mistake of me moving the pen on the page. Now, as you do this a few times through quick exercises, you might find some techniques you want to carry forward into a more advanced design. And you can get out a ruler and some triangles, use technical pens or hard graphite pencils, and draft this out on a page and get a very precise and technical drawing from it. But it's always good to start a little free and just see what your eyes and your hands begin to create and how you're thinking through that visual medium on the page. Now, I found something interesting here. I began to connect a corner or a vertice to an edge. And if I do that everywhere, we'd start to just get probably a bunch of triangles. But in a few places, again, it reduces that shift of the rule set, maybe a new layer of continuity that we can follow in the drawing. And I'm going to try to transpose my technique that I found on the other side of thickening the edge to this new condition on the left half. And both halves of the drawing don't have to be the same, even if they start from similar rule sets. I'm kind of enjoying here finding some kink and continuity that starts to make new shapes, like the smaller triangle that's a little different than all the quadrilaterals. And we'll see where it goes as I start to divide the page further down. And there you can see, tracking over the lines, adding layers of lines through motion. So just one line next to another starts to make something thicker, more intense on that piece of paper, tracking a trajectory across it. And we don't know where this will go yet, but it creates a visual artifact that we can dig into as we continue to develop the drawing. And once I've established some of these boundaries, maybe I'll start to search for new shapes or new ways to interface with the shapes that are emerging from the subdivision, keeping in mind that I'm always dividing a whole further down into more holes. But I can always subvert that cellular-based logic, right, that we're always going to have new shapes or new cells within the old shapes, by doing things like I've done here, right, adding those lines of intensity that carve their way through the drawing and break up the eye, so we're not only seeing closed regions, but new, maybe two-dimensional collections of lines that we can call another type of shape, like a T shape or a C or a zigzag. I'm getting a pretty good density going in the drawing here, and it looks like we're probably coming towards an opportunity to step back and see if there's anything kind of new we can layer into this. I started this drawing without any specific purpose as a design tool. It's not trying to solve any problem beyond just exploring the technique of subdivision. But as I read into it and I use my background or my intention, my training in architectural thinking, I might start to look at this as the facade or roof or panel of a building. I might start to think of how could these cells become new windows into a space, or maybe it's a landscape. We'll let that develop through the drawing. It's nice to have this little quick space of just exploring. And again, we don't want to worry if everything's completely precise or in perfectly the right spot. We're trying to follow a general guiding set of rules and how we divide each shape relative to its neighbors and its previous subdivision. But they don't have to be completely rigid. They can be very flexible, and you can start to get regions that have their own character, but in some way visually relate to the rest. And you also want to be able to move quickly and think while you're drawing, and let your eyes and your hand guide the process and see where it goes. So it helps to be a little flexible, let the page be the canvas where things develop, and to not worry too much if you make a little wobble or mistake. And every once in a while, after a quick session of thinking through and designing, got pretty far in those 7 minutes, we can step back, maybe grab another medium, and just start to play with it there.
Voilà plus de 1000 ans que les guerres sont écoulées, que nos vies ne sont plus que des soupirs. La rage au loin s'est catapultée, pour le meilleur car il n'y a de pire. Au fin fond de la terre océan, là où les sépultures demeurent, résident les autodestructeurs, souriant tels des enfants. La vie s'est barrée, vous malandrins, à la recherche d'une nouvelle lueur. Ça me rappelle quand on prenait le train, quand ma vie à tes côtés avait une saveur. Je me souviens des rictus de plaisir.
Here I found an interest or desire to start to give more character to some of the quadrilateral shapes, coming in, offsetting their edges slightly with a pencil, and beginning to pull them into something more curved in the center, kind of like a skylight or an aperture on the Millennium Falcon that may have influenced me as a designer growing up with that medium. And some of the shapes don't work for that. They've got kinky edges, they're a little funny, so we start to fill them in to produce areas of value and tone, just walking our way through the space of the drawing. And as some become more opaque or more textured, and if we think of this again, maybe as a landscape, they could start to be softer areas. It's always important to keep your tools working well. Use this little bit of architecture ASMR. I take my lead pointer and my lead sharpener and just grind it to a new fine point. Now that we're nice and sharp and ready to go again, you can also begin to add shapes. Here I've decided to add a small lip to the outside of this, just something to differentiate this half, exploring. Instead of dividing, I've increased the area by adding an L shape here. It still uses a closed boundary, so I still have something that could work with subdivision. I'm kind of rounding out a few more of my offset apertures. And then we can move to the other side and see what we've discovered in these initial techniques and how they might play a role in a new area of the drawing. that initial dividing line has a strong presence here, and so you might want to do several quick studies where you divide the initial shape in different ways and see which one speaks to you visually, which one kind of gives you some interest in how the page could develop. And here I'm just taking my time to offset those edges, pull in the corners, and then connect them with some kind of weighted curve, kind of a spline curve in there. And then we round it out to make it feel a little more organic, a little more held in place. Maybe it's an amoeba holding itself within that frame. Letting myself get lost in a little bit of the repetition of one technique of drawing so that we can begin to fill in a pretty broad area of the drawing quickly to have something to resolve into a visual format that we can read into.
Mais cette histoire est loin de nous maintenant. Et avec toi, je ne regrette rien. Je me crois toujours gravé contre ton sein. Mon âme sommeille désormais calmement. On n'était ni célèbre, ni grand.
Not every shape, again, works for these, so I'm taking smaller triangle shapes and beginning to fill them in with a little bit more tone to break up the surface of this piece, finding a few more that can have the cell nature offset inward. And then I thought, what about this area, this big blank spot? Something we can do there. Something maybe a little different. Here's a point of emphasis. And this is always great to look for in a drawing, places where you can develop something that stands out, and that is a unique entrance into the page. And here I was starting to think a little bit of it as like a landscape or a roofscape of some building context. And so maybe this is a courtyard or kind of an entry area with that thick, heavy wall around it, something internal to the building, but outside and unique and different than the rest of the landscape. I continued to work with my technique of offset, and then I, made some strange decisions here, kind of put in this, wood tile brick pattern, and then pulled in another one of the little peanut shapes there. And as I was drawing some more, I kind of thought, I don't really like what happened in there. I'm not sure what to do about it yet. And I felt the drawing needed just a little bit more punch in its bigger ground. So I began to fill in some of the cells with the marker to give them a little more contrast. And said, let's just draw through that. But I can't erase it. It's in pen. It's kind of a great way to work through a generative drawing. Give it a medium that can't be backtracked. I can only go forward. I have to decide when it's time to erase something with the mark. Here we've kind of reached the end of a drawing. I want to give it a little bit more presence on the page, take it from this pure 2D to a little bit more three-dimensionality that I'm starting to see in it, and just really quickly pull down some edges in a parallel fashion so it begins to have the kind of isometric position on the page. And I can play with that new little edge I added to have a little more dimension. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Technique. It's a great way to explore quick ways into design that you can practice anywhere. I hope you discovered some quick ways to start to visualize ideas about a design that work with regions and how they're subdivided. Stay tuned for more. We'll look at adding shapes, dividing regions, layering, contouring, all in little quick episodes that you can take and practice anywhere you are with a notebook, a pencil, or go into the computer and see what they might lead to. Until next time, like it if you do, subscribe, and stay tuned. Thank you.